Stephen Bazire is a fan of the long-gone Southwold light railway, so much so that he's recreated it in his back garden. All line-side features are present and correct in this version, deep in the heart of Norfolk.
The Southwold Railway opened in 1879 and connected the seaside resort of Southwold in Suffolk to the main line Great Eastern Railway at Halesworth. It's about 9.5 miles. There were 3 intermediate stations. It was built to the gauge of 3 foot, which is relatively unusual for Britain. Only the Ravenglass Nestdale and the Isle of Man were also built to the 3 foot gauge, obviously as well as the Irish network. And it ran essentially until about 1929, when it was closed rather suddenly, having really changed very little from when it was opened. The railway had 4 steam engines. There was only 1 engine in steam most of the time, and as far as one can gather, there was probably only 1 or 2 engines actually working at any one time. It had 6 six-wheeled coaches, which are apparently rather unpleasant to sit in because they wobbled rather a lot. The railway was seen locally initially as a means of transport, and a major means of transport and connection with the outside world, and as a way of bringing people into Southwold as what it wanted to be, which was a major seaside resort, perhaps for more wealthier people. Peaked in the early 1900s, but then as the passenger numbers began to decline and buses took over, very little was done to the railway to keep it up to date, and so it derailed frequently, was often late, the services were run down, and it really just sort of faded out of existence. I first got interested in the Southwold Railway when my parents had a caravan in Dunwich, just south of Southwold, and as teachers we spent the whole summer holidays up there, and as a young lad who used to cycle around, I'd always liked narrow gauge railways, I'd always liked railways, and then I discovered on my very doorstep was a narrow gauge railway. So I used to cycle around and look at all what remained of the railway, which was not a huge amount, bearing in mind it closed in 1929. After 50 years history of uneventful running. The model of the swing bridge is about as best as I can get in terms of design. I'd have to move into the next door neighbour's garden to get the full correct size of the bridge. It's made out of aluminium struts, which are bolted together, and then the large circular bit in the middle is actually a chimney pot resting on the bottom of the pond. Walberswick was the first station on the line out of Southwold. It was about a mile or so from the village, so you'll see a lot of old photographs of people's bicycles by the station because they had to get there. With all the buildings, I've tried to be as accurate as I can be. I've got about 250 photographs of the Southwold Railway. And to say the Walberswick station isn't very attractive. It was basically just a wooden shed with a corrugated iron roof on it. Blythburgh station is, you can still see the site of it from the A12 next to the White Hart pub in Blythburgh. The shed that is at the back of the station is actually still there, or it was last year, although in a rather dilapidated condition. The road bridge over the A12 was taken down about 30 years ago. Well, it was apparently very solid structure, so it took the council a lot of money to break it down. There was a siding by the water mill, and I did have a reasonable model of the original, but unfortunately it rotted away, and I've replaced it with one I built my son for his model farm when he was a young lad, and it's rotted away as well, but I've just left it there. It looks about right, really. There have been numerous attempts to reopen the Southwold Railway since it closed in 1929. There were two fairly soon afterwards which competed with each other and failed. There was another in the 1935 era, and that was about it until the last 2 or 3 years when the Southwold Railway Society started and are now in advanced stages of planning a line which could potentially link Halesworth with Southwold again. Initially it may be tied in with a park and ride system within Southwold, which suffers very heavily from a lot of traffic. Wenneston was the last station before Halesworth and had the only public level crossing on the line. The village itself was relatively small, much like the other ones, and it did have a river next to the road as well. So I have got the station followed by the road crossing, followed by a little bridge over the river, which, viewed at the right angle, I rather like. The quarry gravel pit siding was used as an additional engine shed later on in the line's existence, and one of the engines was left there when the line closed. So just shunted in there and left to fall to bits, and the shed fell apart as well. But they did have an amount of quarrying there and a water pump to water the engines from Halesworth. You can still find the site now. It's just about accessible. Journey's end was Halesworth, which after nearly an hour's worth of travelling at 15 miles an hour must have been a welcome relief for most of the travellers. It joined on with the Great Eastern Railway LNER, where the standard gauge lines had connections to Yarmouth, Lowestoft, Ipswich and then to London. The Southwold Railway part of Halesworth station was built round the edge of the standard gauge. There were manual transshipment sidings and a footbridge over to the main line. I managed to pick up bits of clutter to go on the railway from a wide variety of places, including motorway service stations and so on. One of the most bizarre things I found was a little character in a shop called Brambles in Norwich, which is a wee man. Why anybody would want to buy a model of a bloke having a wee, I have no idea, but I did. In fact, I bought several of them, and here's one now.